this summer I've heard it 3 times. I've heard it scream 3 times. But it's been coming here for years.
From strange sounds to potential sightings, northern British Columbia has always been a hotbed for those who believe in Sasquatch.
Well, now a Canadian journalist who has explored the Great Bear Rainforest is sharing what he has discovered.
John Zada's book is called In the Valley of the Noble Beyond in the Search for Sasquatch, and he joins us this morning. Thank you, John, for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Fascinating book. I've always been very interested in Sasquatch. Have you always been interested in the subject matter?
I grew up at a time when Sasquatch was quite prevalent in the media and the pop culture, 70s and early 80s. And yeah, I read a lot of Sasquatch books as, a young boy, going to the public library. And I found that as I went into adulthood, and as the topic sort of waned a little bit, I still kept meeting people who had stories or had experiences, and so that kept my interest going essentially into adulthood, and then I kind of came to doing this project.
And so this project, you did a lot of research. You went to the Great Bear Rainforest, which is just below the Alaska Panhandle. It's like the northern tip of Vancouver Island on the mainland. So a very big area. You went there, but you didn't actually plan to do a book or to research Sasquatch. So how did that all come about?
That's right. So I'm a writer and journalist, and I do a lot of travel, journalism. And so I went to the area, to the Central Coast. So where the towns of Bella Coola, Bella Bella, Klemtu are.
Beautiful area.
It's gorgeous, yeah. And it was essentially a travel piece that I was going to work on. It was a 2-week period, and I knew at the back of my mind that there was this long history of reports there. And but when I got there, the timing was such that there had been a whole bunch of reports of the creatures, and as I was doing my I guess research to write this travel piece, I kept coming across these stories. And so by the end of the 2-week trip, I had all of this information and like anecdotal research, and then I just decided to do a book afterwards the following year.
So what did the indigenous people that live in that area tell you in terms of what they saw, what they know about Sasquatch? Did you ever get close to them?
Yeah, well, their reports there are fairly consistent with others across the Pacific Northwest or even North America. Just this sort of large, muscular, hair-covered, half man, half ape type creature that they come in contact with on their fishing trips or hunting, or even on the edges of their villages. They sometimes are reported to come into town and bang on buildings, or to vocalize or rock throw. Sometimes fishermen get accosted by them, and so they're not everyone up there believes in them, obviously, but it's like anywhere else. But there is I think a higher frequency of reports, and because the creatures do exist in their stories and in their culture, there is more of an openness to the phenomenon.
Did you find that there was any kind of pattern when it comes to the frequency of sightings or hearing them? Does activity come in waves?
You find that there are reports all the time, in intervals, but generally they do come in clusters, and that's what I was told when I was up there. And then when I was there for my original travel article piece, I was at the tail end of one such, I guess, maybe year-long period of higher activity, let's say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's be honest, a lot of non-believers out there. And there's that famous video of Bigfoot down in California, widely thought to be a hoax. Why do you think there is a reluctance for people to believe what you write, what others write about Bigfoot, and is it just made up? Here's the video.
Well, I think skeptics tend to be, or debunkers, or people are just not interested in it. They're mostly urban people, city people. They don't really know much about the phenomenon. I think those who are proponents of the Sasquatch would say that in order to really appreciate the topic, or to have any kind of understanding about the possibility of their existence, you have to go out to these places. You have to be in the context. You have to be on the land, and to hear the stories from the people to actually kind of know what you're dealing with. And I think most people are just, who reject it are expressing an opinion, and they're largely urban folk. So
okay,
yeah, I mean, we're also like a very rational, scientifically minded culture, and I mean that also contributes to it. I mean, if there's no evidence for it, then it can't exist, and that may also be the case.
The book is called In the Valley of the Noble Beyond, In Search of Sasquatch, and the author is John Zada. Thanks for joining us. There's a book launch tonight in Chinatown. I understand.
Yeah, Massey Books, right?
Yeah, at Massey Books, 7 p.m. And Charlie Demers will be there. He's a local comedian and writer, and he'll be hosting the event.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
All right.
8:25, the sounds of Sasquatch. Yes, indeed. Welcome back to Breakfast Television on this Monday. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. Very pleased to welcome John Zada to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You have written the fascinating new book that is called In the Valleys of the Noble Beyond, In Search of the Sasquatch. As a young boy, when I would go to the library, I would always get those cryptozoology books that looked at the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Bigfoot. And what was your initial fascination with the Sasquatch?
It was much the same. I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. And that was a time of, heavy duty Sasquatch coverage in the pop culture and the mainstream media, and stuff like The $6 Million Man and like In Search of with Leonard Nimoy and
Harry and the Hendersons.
And that came a bit later. Yes, probably at the
that was more my time.
Further end of that phase. Yeah. And but also like you, I would go to public libraries with my mom as a kid, and I somehow found that unexplained section in the book in the library, and gravitated to those books. Author by the name of John Green was the first journalistic chronicler or writer of Sasquatch books. He was based in Harrison Hot Springs. He was the mayor there, I think, back in the 50s or the 60s, and he did the first sort of real journalistic research into the subject, and it was those books that I think really brought me into the fold.
So lending further credibility to the whole nature of Sasquatch and the myth behind it, you traveled to the Great Bear Rainforest, one of the gems in BC near Bella Coola, and trekked around there. And according to your book, people in that area are convinced that Bigfoot walks among them there.
Right. Well, going back to John Green, he was one of the first, investigators to go up to that part of the BC coast, the central and north coast, along with another researcher named Bob Titmus. And I knew about that reading the books from way back, and I traveled there on an assignment. I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, and I was there just to write a travel piece. And I had in mind that this was an area known for the reports, but when I got there, my article, which was more travel focused, started to kind of move in the direction of Bigfoot reports, because at the time of my trip, there was a whole bunch of reports that were happening on the coast, and that drew my attention. And then after that assignment, I resolved to go back to the area to actually do a book about it, because there was just so much material to be written about.
And you see this all over the world with certain legends. My wife was hiking in the Himalayas, and she says that Sherpas there convinced, they talk almost nonchalantly about the existence of Yeti. And then you came into contact with people in your travels in the Great Bear Rainforest who are convinced that they've either seen one or they do exist, right?
Well, if you've been up there, anyone who's been up there would know that the Great Bear Rainforest is an area of, abundant nature and a beautiful, pristine ecosystem, and it's another level of wilderness and natural world up there. And so, bears and all the wildlife exist all around the residents who live there. They fish, they hunt. You go into people's backyards, and it's essentially like it's the forest. It's the wilderness back there. So they're quite comfortable and quite familiar with that area and with all of the the wildlife and the animals, and so they're almost authorities in a way, I would say, on what is there, and so you have to take their word to some degree quite seriously, regardless of what your position is on the subject. Especially if you're a city person, you're not really versed in that context, right?
I won't spoil it for people who haven't read the book, because I do urge you to check it out in terms of what you saw, if you did encounter a Bigfoot. But what does it say, the notion of maybe the fact that we don't have a lot of proof, that may make us more human in that quest for the unknown?
Well, I did sort of steer the direction of the book towards that question of what is it that drives us to pursue the creature. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of different answers for it. It depends on one's take for it. But I think, I mean, ultimately, we do have a huge curiosity in mysteries and in the unknown. And I think a lot of us really kind of yearn for some kind of indication or perhaps even proof that there is something more to the known universe than what we, have discovered as
reality-based.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big driver. I mean, there are people who they say consciously that, like, I'm doing this to, I'm investigating the Sasquatch because I'm trying to prove it scientifically, or
of course.
And that is true. But I think deep down, even when you talk to the scientists who study, the creatures, I think there is a kind of almost pseudo-religious kind of reverence for the notion that there might be this really intelligent, self-aware humanoid being out there, and I mean, that's the appeal to me, right? So maybe I'm projecting it onto them, but I see it in them.
Well, fascinating stuff. The book is great, John. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing about it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll put all the information online, plus the interview. You can check that out. And Mary's got your news headlines when we come back. Stick around.
Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, there's no denying one of the biggest mysteries of our time is Sasquatch real? Yes, I know you've been losing a lot of sleep over it. Well, author John Zada did a little exploring himself, and he joins us in studio this morning. He's got a new book out. It's called In the Valleys of the Noble Beyond, In Search of the Sasquatch. John, thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a little background, just to give people some narrative here. What do we know about Sasquatch and Bigfoot?
Well, we don't have a body. That's sort of the salient point. There is no firm evidence of the creature, but there are countless reports of these hairy hybrid man-ape beings across North America. The reports go back decades and centuries. Reports of tracks, plaster casts of tracks, and so it's assumed by those who believe that there is this kind of undiscovered primate out there in the forest, but science, of course, is saying no. We don't have the body. We don't have the physical evidence. So that's why it remains a mystery.
Well, speaking of the forest, I mean, you went out, right, and you went to the Great Bear Rainforest, which is central coast of British Columbia kind of area.
That's right.
Walk me through your travels there.
Well, this region of British Columbia, it's on the central and north coast, as you say. It's the most. It's the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world. I mean, it's a place of unfathomable beauty, incredible biodiversity. It may be one of the most pristine wilderness regions on the planet remaining. And so you've got a bunch of small communities there, largely indigenous, and there are a lot of reports going back, again, for decades. And so I did a lot of traveling by boat and float plane and ferry to go to these places and speak with the locals and hear their stories about seeing the creatures.
And you recount some of those travels right here in this book. What can people expect when they read this?
Well, it's a book that's more about Sasquatch and more than Sasquatch. It's looks at oil politics and the hunting and all these sort of controversies, and I get into psychology quite a bit, right? So I look at perhaps the whole phenomenon involves misperception, cognitive error, and belief, and so I mean it's a weave of a lot of different themes and approaches, and it is an attempt to conclusively determine once and for all if there are these creatures, and I mean, I won't spoil it for the reader.
Well, also I can't ask you that question?
You could ask.
Because you just said conclusively, and that's what a lot of people want to know.
Yeah.
So the question is, all right, you've done the research, you've done the travels.
Yeah.
Is Sasquatch real?
I lean a little bit towards it. I have a childhood interest in the subject, and I think that pushes me a bit in that direction. I don't think it's preposterous.
Okay.
I don't know for sure. I haven't seen one, so I can't say that there are. Again, what really kind of drove me to write the book was to really figure out, if there is no Sasquatch, is it a perfect storm of misperception, or is it a perfect storm of concealment? Intelligent creature, hidden, and
our society just not really wanting to kind of look at this closely enough.
Whether you're a believer or not, it's an interesting book. You can check out John. He'll be speaking at the Thin Air Winnipeg International Writers Festival today at 10 a.m. at Red River College. Also today, 4:30 p.m. at Millennium Library. John, fascinating stuff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.